Okay. Um, so hello everyone. My name's Alex. Um, this talk is called The Bright Future of Ember Language Tooling, which is something I've been focusing on very recently. Quick introduction. So I used to be on the Ember core team way back in the day, and I work at a startup called Future Proof Retail, which probably, the timing aligns that one thing started and the other thing concluded. So I've been at Future Proof for about 10 years. And that kind of was taking a lot of time, so didn't really stay on the core team for too long. Uh, in the meantime, I made a project or made an Ember add-on called Ember Concurrency, which is one of the more popular add-ons in the ecosystem. And at Futureproof, one of the main apps that I build and maintain is mobile checkout, which is a white labeled app that lets you go into grocery stores, scan items on your phone, and pay entirely on your phone. And that app is a Ember app running in a native context for Android and iOS. And so that's been going on for 10 years of Ember, and it's not totally up to date just yet, but it's close. And I'm motivated to do some of the language tooling work to kind of help ease that final process as we bring in like GTS files and other nice modern things. Oh, oh, I just had a microphone change. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I must be
Yes,
fine.
but
Nothing
yep.
changed.
It's a
keep
bit
on.
quieter.
This is probably worth fixing. Just one moment. Apologies if you're hearing any kind of crackle as it switches over. Is it back to normal?
Back to very
Yep,
good.
perfect.
Great. Okay. Okay. So someone recently wrote an article called saying that the Ember language tooling experience was something akin to a tooling pit of incoherence, which strong words, but something I agree with. I'm not always totally up to date on all the latest Ember happenings, and so when I was catching up to this and I was trying to make sense for like what do I actually need to install? There's something called an Ember language server, and then there's an unstable language server that says, oh, it's actually the stable language server, at which point my brain broke. And there's so many different things to choose from. And then it seemed like maybe the language server didn't even know about Glimmer syntax. You needed another extension to support that. So if you look at this article, which I linked in the previous page, it kind of shows you what I mean by this, kind of which language server do you install? Why are there multiple ones? Why are there all these things for syntax highlighting? Why isn't that kind of included as part of another extension? It's confusing, particularly relative to other language frameworks, other JS frameworks and whatnot. So until very recently, some of this has already improved, like in the last month or so. But until very recently, there's multiple Ember language servers. There was one from the Ember tooling, which would make you think it's kind of the official one, but it hadn't been maintained for like 2 to 3 years, and its corresponding VS Code extension was deprecated. And actually, the one that you're supposed to use was one that was originally called unstable and eventually renamed to stable, but it's still not like where you'd expect it to be. So the good news for that, at least, is that uh, that has been merged back into the Ember tooling language server. Um, there's probably a little bit more like cleanup to do in terms of making sure the old stable language server one has had its extensions deprecated and whatnot, but it's getting better already. And so the tooling pit is getting slightly less incoherent, but there's still a ways to go. But then aside from this thing called Ember Language Server, there's this thing called Glint, which is another language server that provides completions and all sorts of type checking to Ember apps. And its main focus is basically on really robust type checking and giving you really nice completions. Uh, Almost like basically being a robust TypeScript experience and feature parity, or at least that's the goal to like templates and eventually, hopefully, the new GTS format, even though, as I'll mention, there's still a ways to go on that. So you have these two things, Ember Language Server and Glint, and they both kind of have a center overlapping region where you can do things like go to definition, find references, and hover and get some additional information. But Ember language server has a bunch of other really nice things like link to route completions, and it also has like a really interesting I don't know if most people know this, but kind of like a modular add-on system within itself so that if people want to experiment and add functionality, there's a sort of add-on system for doing that, almost like similar to how Ember has its own add-on system. Um, and Glint, its main differentiator is that it just has this really robust type checking support. So why are these things separate? There's not really a great answer other than it just hasn't been combined yet, but we'll come back to that later and see if that's a possibility. As for GTS files, which is the sort of modern Ember way of writing components where you can embed your templates directly in the file and they can kind of close over any constants, including any import statements. That's kind of like the modern way that a lot of these different JavaScript frameworks have converged. Well, it's not that great still. And I know this because I personally did some work on this 2 months or so just to bring auto imports to the experience of working with GTS files. And by that, I just mean the ability to type in like foo component, have it find where foo component is, and then if you tab complete, that'll actually add the auto import to the top of the file. And if you've used any just tiny bit of TypeScript, that's like the bread and butter. It's just you kind of expect it to work. And when you switch to a GTS file and suddenly your editor isn't like lighting up like it normally does, it's really frustrating. So this is sorry. I'll, I guess that was accident. I'll just keep going. Um, so this is something that has a that there's still a lot of things missing. The auto imports PR was merged 2 months ago, but and it's made things a lot better. But there's still like a lot of feature parity gap between what you might expect from a normal TS language server. So there's no like refactors, extract method. There's still glitches with auto imports and like with the PR that I submitted. In particular, there's things like if you're in the middle of typing it in a template tag and you have an unclosed tag, it's invalid syntax and the system doesn't even really know how to do completions in that. And that's like a really common problem when you're writing these language servers. You kind of need forgiving syntax parsers and we're not quite there with that. So more importantly, we have to think about who's going to be working on this and do we really know of someone who's going to be up to the task of doing the kind of grueling work that's involved and even getting completions to come in nicely. So this is an slightly exaggerated new piece of code from the PR that I had to write. And you really have to start working with these ugly internals of the TypeScript service. And there's not a lot of guidance. You really have to drill down and find like what's setting this global state to this and this and this. And you have like the first set of completions and then a resolved completion to get the next stuff. It's not fun. It's not stuff that I want to keep in my brain at all. Nor do I think we really want anyone else to have to do that. So how do we solve this problem as Ember developers? Well, we all know we all understand and love convention over configuration, which is one of sort of the cornerstones of Ember and Rails and all these other frameworks. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a language tooling framework that abstracted all of these ugly bits away so that we could focus on the stuff that makes Ember and not have to get into the weeds on TypeScript services and things like that. So the good news is there's something called Volar.js, or actually, is it Volar? I'm not sure. Someone needs to tell me that. I actually asked that question in the Discord like 5 minutes ago. So Volar.js is something that's called the Embedded Language Tooling Framework, and I believe it originated out of the Vue community, and it is used for Vue's language tooling, as well as MDX, which is the sort of embedded JSX within Markdown, and Astro, which is another framework that has a lot of embedded different languages, including JSX, including other things, maybe even Vue. I'm not sure. I haven't used it personally. I just know it's kind of like the most modular, insert one thing into another framework that I'm aware of. So what is meant by embedded language? So, just even looking at HTML, HTML gives you the option of typing a style tag or a script tag and writing CSS or JavaScript respectively. And any modern editor, when you do that, is going to have good syntax highlighting specific to CSS within a style tag and good syntax highlighting for JavaScript inside a script tag. So that's the HTML, this thing that we use all the time, has embedded languages, and editor support for that needs to be pretty good. But a lot of these other frameworks also have these embedded languages as well. If you look at a Vue component file, you have script tags and a template tag. If you look at Svelte, similar things. Um, and of course, we have Ember's modern GTS files where you have these TypeScript uh, classes, and then you have the embedded template syntax, which is kind of Ember's invention. And so ideally, when you look at that in the editor, you want your template, your embedded template to not just be getting weird JavaScript formatting. You want an experience that's appropriate for HTML or handlebars, actually. So I thought that seemed pretty cool. I saw some really interesting presentations on Volar and how easy they made the prospect of language tooling for a new framework seem. And I did a spike to see what would it be like to rework Glint's internals to function atop Volar. And it the spike went very well. I basically had to do the work of expressing GTS files in something called a virtual code, which is a sort of core Volar primitive of virtual code can just basically be any code, any language that has embedded codes, and you specify the mappings between this region and that region. And if you do a good job of that, Volar gives you a lot of stuff for free. So what I found was it seemed like I instantly got TypeScript editor experience feature parity just by implementing this one primitive. I'm sure there's a ways to go, but I was able to, this is from a GTS file in this screenshot. I was able to kind of open in the available refactors, and now I'm seeing things for like extract function to modular scope or into a separate method. All these things that you normally exist for TypeScript but don't exist in Glint today. So if you were to just run Glint language server and see what options are available to you in a GTS file, you wouldn't have any of this stuff. And all I had to do was do the one main thing, which is express things into a virtual code, and suddenly I'm getting all these things for free. Um, Another example of this is I think there's an open PR, or maybe it was merged already in Glint to support organized imports or sort imports. But Voller just kind of gave it to you for free, and it worked perfectly. So there's all this code that you don't need to write if you just kind of embrace the framework. And this what we're seeing here is on the screen is something called the Voller Labs extension. And so this is an extension built for the developers of Volar-driven toolkits or language tooling frameworks. And what we're looking at here is they have a screen where you can open any of the files that you've taught Volar about in terms of these virtual codes I was mentioning before, and it will show you the mapping between the outer file and then the embedded virtual codes. So to implement GTS files, this is kind of getting in the weeds a little bit. You have your raw GTS file on the left, and on the right you have the IR format, intermediate representation. This is the thing that internally Glint is passing to TypeScript for type checking, and ultimately is how Glint is able to come up with errors and warnings and completions, just kind of reusing the TypeScript service and then mapping it back to completions and hover and whatnot on your GTS file. And so here, this probably would have been cooler to show as a demo, but I have the times attribute on the left highlighted, and it kind of shows the corresponding TypeScript times object on the right that it corresponds to. So this, like, if you're ever in the position of maintaining Glint, or if you contribute to it, there's little commands to like debug and see what the IR format is, and that's great. We've invested a bunch of time into it, but if this is something you can just get for free, that's another big chunk of code that you can kind of delete from Glint, because you can just use the stuff that's already been made for you. So based on this experience, I went ahead and wrote an RFC, which I'm actually getting some feedback that maybe it didn't even need to be an RFC. It's just like good enough ideas that no one really disagrees with. But I wanted to sort of sketch out the vision for what I wanted to see happen based on this very successful spike. Um, So check that out. I would say in just brief, um, it's like cutting away a lot of old stuff that doesn't really matter to normal Ember developers, including removing something called GlimmerX, which was kind of an experimental framework used for driving some of the Ember template imports stuff that we've since landed on today. Um, and just focus on the Ember stuff. That work to remove GlimmerX has already been merged as of like a few hours ago. But the main thing is to propose reworking Glint to work atop Volar.js, and then eventually, if that goes well, apply those same lessons to Ember language server and see if those two could be merged. It's ambitious, but basically everyone seems to be on the same page about it. That it's a good idea. But of course, the question with our community is going to be who's going to work on it. So in this case, it is going to be me, at least for the time being. The good news is that I've already been talking to other Volar.js developers and tooling framework maintainers who are available and interested to help with the Glint Volarizing. And after I spend a bit of time kind of doing the Ember specific cleanup, I'll be working with them to really kind of finish this Volar spike and then hopefully kind of bring this home so that everyone can benefit from it. So what could people here or the other people seeing this in the future do to help? So I've signed up for GitHub sponsors, and I believe some of the other developers that'll be working on it for Volar have done the same. It's still pending for me, but I'll basically make more noise about this soon. But it would be great to get some help because it's definitely very time consuming. Um, and that is kind of the main pitch. I don't know if there's any ability to take questions on here, but that's basically that's my presentation, and I don't know how close I am to going over, but I think it's about 20 minutes.
Yeah, you've got about 20 minutes free there. We started a bit early, so if there are any questions, fire them at Alex. That was awesome. Anyone?
Yeah, Chris mentions the biome linter, which I'm still kind of new to, but um, just a sort of fun fact, like there's kind of like a shift in the Volar thinking, which would apply to Glint as well. Glint was a language has been implemented as a language server. That's you're passing JSON messages back and forth to your editor, but it seems that Volar's kind of taking things in the direction of moving things to be expressed as TypeScript plugins. And there's a few different like subtle benefits to doing that way. Um, Anecdotally, the performance seems to be better, but when you are working in a system with like a lot of different TypeScripty flavors or a lot of these different languages that have had TypeScript plugins working with them, if you have your system such as GTS files or Glint written using TypeScript plugin, you get better interop. And there's a lot of these other things. I think I might be getting something wrong here, but other linters and things like that are going to benefit if you have things expressed as TS plugins. So that's also on the roadmap and a direction that Volar's been taking things. Um, do you think Volar can also be used to get smarter code mods? I don't know. I don't know how code mods, whether they interact with um, like the common sort of Volar-driven language tooling. Those might be separate. I wouldn't think they'd have too much overlap though. Um, and yes, if it's pronounced Spanish, it'd be like volar, which means to fly, but a lot of people pronounce it Volar. Okay, so I think that's it.